Hey review family, keep it tight. My name is Jay Morris, reviewing music for the love of music, and welcome back to the metal Tempest. And in this video I'm doing something a little bit more just personal, intimate, having a good time. I have a really wonky setup, like I have my camera here at my computer and my regular recording microphone that I use for like voice acting and shit. And a while back ago, I asked you guys to give me your votes for what band you'd like to see me rank the discography of. And to honestly, my surprise, Metallica was the band that won. And what better discography to get people stirred up or just get the opinions flowing than Metallica's discography? I'm really happy. I found a tier list that only had the 10 main albums, so all of their like side projects and like the Lou Reed collaborations. Sadly, for those of you that wanted to see me talk about like every little thing Metallica's ever breathed on, I didn't do that. It's just the 10 main albums. And obviously this is sort of an interactive thing. And be sure to check in on my community tab when you can, because I make polls like this a lot of times where you guys actually choose the content that I make. And it's dimly lit. I have all of the lights off because I wanted, a macabre and creepy atmosphere. And without further ado, let me know in the comment section below what your favorite and least favorite Metallica records are, or just what your overall thoughts of Metallica is to begin with. So, okay, just want to preface by saying, if I hate or love a record that you hate or love, or opposites attract type of thing, no sweat, I'll take the piss. If you heavily disagree with one of my opinions, let me know. At the end of the day, this is just my opinion. So we're going to be starting off with Kill 'Em All. So die-hard devout people that love thrash metal era Metallica will always say that this is their best album because they think that they sold out even with something like Master of Puppets or Ride the Lightning, and therefore they're just going to say that. But how many Metallica songs that are still talked about or are played are from this album? This album, in my opinion, is like what I would consider to be a C. I own this album on physical copy, and I do enjoy this record, but my biggest issue here is not the fact that it's not their most known, or it's their debut, and they haven't fleshed out their style. It's kind of nothing like that, because their energy and their mix was actually pretty damn good on this record, and notably better than it would be even on certain later records. My issue with this is at the core of it. If you've heard more than like 5 Motorhead songs, this is a massive Motorhead worship record. It's very speed metal influenced, and obviously early thrash metal is obviously, it comes from speed metal. That's what I talked about in my genres like defining video. And it's not their energy, it's not the mix, it's nothing like that. I just think this record is kind of very basic when you look back at it. And I appreciate it as a stepping stone for the rest of Metallica's discography, as opposed to a literal thing that should be like the judge of their overall quality as a thrash metal band, because they were still fleshing out their sound. They were wearing like Motorhead influences on their sleeve, and this was also around the time that like Dave Mustaine had been like a part of the writing for this record, but then due to like volatility was like let off from the band before the recording process, so didn't really get a lot of the credits for that. But anyway, I'll stop ranting about that. Hardwired to Self-Destruct is going to get a hard fucking D. Oh my god, this record sucks. I remember when this record came out, and it got like a decent amount of good publicity because people were like, "Oh, it's not as bad as Death Magnetic. It's not as bad as Saint Anger." And it's like, well, yeah, if a monkey throws a pile of shit at your face and then the next day throws a stick at you instead, the stick's gonna hurt, and you're probably gonna think that monkey's having better behavior, but it's still a monkey throwing a fucking stick at your face. That's what Hardwired to Self-Destruct feels like. It feels like Metallica trudging through the mud and reiterating things and riffs that they had made 15 years prior, but better. And I'm not going to be the person that says that Metallica sold out, because you're going to hear when I get to the Black Album my opinions of the whole sellout Metallica debate. Hardwired to Self-Destruct shouldn't have been a double album. It's too bloated, there's too much content on it, and they drag themselves through the mud with so much unnecessary content. I don't like the mix of it, it's overly compressed, it's too loud, and admittedly, I will say this. I'll say this in its defense. It has a better mix than Death Magnetic did, but the material and the solos are not some of their strongest. And if you are judging this record as a thrash metal and a heavy metal record, you have to calibrate that measurement, and you have to measure their overall quality in comparison to their other material, because they themselves have admitted that Hardwired to Self-Destruct is a way of giving almost fan service to their fans that have missed their past style. They're not really trying to be experimental, they're not trying to be forward thinking, and it's more so just them coming together to try to make a true blue heavy metal and thrash metal record. But the issue with Metallica in the 2000s and the 2010s is they have never been able to escape this notion of making these albums so much longer than they needed to be, so much more bloated than they needed to be. If there's one concept that Metallica has never been able to properly grasp, it's the issue with just packing a track listing too thin and stretching themselves too thin. And Hardwired to Self-Destruct, while it has its good moments, you just can't really find this. I can't find this record to be enjoyable overall because of how much is either skippable, boring, lackluster, underwhelming, and just as a whole, I don't feel like listening to an album and having to skip around and play hopscotch on the track listing just to try to find the standout moments, and it would make me want to pick any other record over it. But on the flip side of that, which we just talked about, Death Magnetic sits at an interesting point in Metallica's discography, and honestly, I'm gonna give it a C, which might surprise you guys, because I know that a lot of people just rag on Death Magnetic for just being horrible, but a lot of people, like, there were two sides of a coin with Death Magnetic. You had the group of people that really hated this record, thought it was too loud, too compressed, too smitten with the loudness war and going over the top with compression and equalization and distortion and making it sound very blown out. But then you had the other side of people who were like, it's a return to form, it's them returning to their roots, it's them actually making a thrash metal record again, which I'll give you credit for that. Like, comparatively speaking, with Load, Reload, and then Saint Anger, it is in theory, better record overall. But, Death Magnetic's issues is, even if they're trying to reach a bar that they had set in the past and put aside their experimentation and go more towards just their older style, I think they've done far better. And even though I think this record is better than Hardwired to Self-Destruct, because I truly do believe that that record is their overall, like, one of their weakest or their weakest, and you'll see with Saint Anger my opinion of that. Death Magnetic, it once again suffers from being very long-winded for Metallica standards, but I do appreciate their attempt to make another true blue heavy metal and thrash metal record, but it does have the issue of the mix sounding extremely blown out, and it's an issue that Metallica kept having in the 2000s and 2010s, where they feel like to make heavy material, they have to layer distortion and compression, equalization, and just so many effects to make everything so much heavier, when in reality, if you look at their early material that they liked, the rawness and the primitiveness somehow made it heavier than when they lather these things in so many effects. And I also think that the odd choices of distortion that are put on James's vocals on this album just do them absolutely no favors. So moving on from there, we have the Black Album. Now, okay, this might surprise you guys. I actually think the Black Album is really good, and I am very hesitant to put it at anything lower than an A, maybe an S. And I'm a little conflicted about this, because this is the heavy metal album. It is still selling tens, hundreds of thousands of streams and physical copies, vinyls, CDs, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of views on certain tracks and listens on Spotify. The Black Album is what made Metallica a household name. Before that, Metallica was very much enjoyed from people who enjoyed heavy metal and thrash metal. The Black was the record where Metallica became a household name. like Nothing Else Matters, and of course Inner Sandman. I think that's the issue. Like I also believe, yes, Sad But True. The issue with the Black Album is Metallica struggles heavily with being overplayed on this album, but I don't want to make that discredit it. I personally don't listen to the Black Album as much as I used to. It used to be one of my favorite metal albums, but I listen to it far less than I used to for no fault of Metallica, but just the overplaying of many of the key tracks. But even the deep cuts on the Black hit really well. And, you know, this was also the album that people thought Metallica were sellouts, were selling their sound out and were going soft and going accessible, going poppy. In my opinion, this has some of their best, heaviest riffs, but for a different way. And considering the fact that they were coming off the back of making some of the heaviest and most forward-thinking thrash metal releases and most classic and acclaimed thrash metal releases of the 80s and of the 90s, for them to take their sound in a different direction of experimentation, I think yielded amazing results. And in my opinion, and this would go for any sort of art, literature, poetry, whatever it may be, there are certain like TV shows or video games or movies. Sometimes something is heavily acclaimed and rated well and loved by many because it's good. And people seem to forget that. Metallica was not an accessible band. Like, they were a thrash metal band, they were a heavy metal band, and there was so much controversy in the 80s and 90s about heavy metal music. So the fact that Metallica made a record that was accepted by so many people despite having some heavier tracks, this is what made heavy metal become something that was monumental and something that was enjoyed by so many and was a gateway drug for people that were going to get into not only other Metallica releases in the past and maybe get into thrash metal or heavy metal, but get into so many other genres and opened that gateway to heavier music to so many people that had never been exposed to something like that, or if they had, it hadn't been something that was as accessible and digestible as the Black Album. I also think that even though the Black Album is softer, it also has this dark atmosphere. It would have to be the darkest atmosphere of any Metallica record. I really like the Black Album, and I just feel like for its influence, for its acclaim, for what it did for heavy metal music, for the millions of metalheads that it brought into the world to like so many different genres, and the songwriting, the riff writing, the lyricism, the relatability, I just have to put it at an S. Like, I have to put the Black Album at an S. And for those of you that, I know some of you are going to disagree with that, but just for those points and also my own love of the Black Album, I might be skewed, but that's just my personal opinion. So I'm going to rate Load and Reload together because it's hard to do one without the other. So I personally think that Load and Reload are okay. You know, it was their detour into more hard rock territory, and once again, these tracks just these track listings are bloated. Like, they reach very far. I personally really like I maybe I'm skewed because I hold these in a special place in my heart. These were the first Metallica albums I heard, and so maybe I'm a little skewed when it comes to that. And I would understand and get the argument if someone said I was, but I'm going to rate Load and Reload at a B. I personally think Load is much better than Reload as an album. I think that both the singles and deep cuts are better, and I don't personally think that the hard rockisms of these albums really reach too far. I don't think they got corny, I don't think they got cheesy, but I think they sit at a very interesting point in Metallica's discography, because when you look at everything that's surrounding them and came out before and after them, they're surrounded by the worst records of Metallica's discography and the best albums of Metallica's discography. And my only thing is, I feel like they should have been one album with the fluff cut out, and it should have just been Load and Load alone. And it should have been the best tracks of both records in some form or fashion, because they were released in succession so quickly that there was no reason to split them up into two things. And I don't know if it was something for marketing, I don't know if they wanted to sell more albums, but I feel like Load, just as an experience, as a cohesive experience, is a much cleaner and crisper one than Reload. Another reason that I would give both of these Bs is I think the production is pretty tasteful. Maybe it was because they were getting more used to playing around with softer tones on the Black album, and so when they moved on to Load and Reload, they had a better concept and a better way to familiarize themselves with writing semi-softer material, more heavy metal and hard rock inspired material, and therefore the mix wasn't going to be as rough around the edges as something like And Justice for All, which was starting the detour into that material. And so considering they had made a lot of these sort of hard rock inspired tracks on the Black album, I'm not surprised that Load and Reload came out the other side sounding good. And maybe it's another thing that like King Nothing got so overplayed, just like Inner Sandman, and it's one of those heavily iconic Metallica songs, and therefore I feel more inclined to dislike the album just because of the overplayedness of it. But I think just like in their discography, these two records sit right in the middle. I don't think it was done in an untasteful manner. I just think they're overly long. But the riff writing and the hard rockisms I don't think were bad, and especially the production is pretty good. And Justice for All. Now, this is probably going to be a period of time where I'm going to get a lot of hate, but I'm going to put And Justice for All at a C. This record got a lot of acclaim when it came out. It was very heavily praised for being just a continuation of some very good choices in their discography, but in my opinion, And Justice for All suffers from such a fall-off point, both production-wise and riff-wise. I know this record is hated because its production is tinny, the bass is like practically non-existent in the mix, and it's sort of like the thrash metal version of Saint Anger, where the production is overly compressed, it's really loud, it's noisy and chaotic for no particular reason, and it's very busy for no reason. But those reasons and those reasons alone don't make it a C. Those would make it like a B. I personally just don't like the writing on this album, and maybe it's because, you know, Master of Puppets and Ride the Lightning and Kill 'Em All were like such monumental records that had fantastic songwriting and fantastic riff writing that I feel like the solos just didn't come off as hard-hitting. And even though people call this like the end of the amazing age of Metallica, like the end of the golden age and the golden years, I just don't personally feel that way. I think this was the fall-off point, and I'm just not a fan of the writing on this album. Moving on from there, Master of Puppets. So, yeah, I'm just going to put Master of Puppets at an A. That's what I'm feeling. And perhaps people can disagree with that opinion because it is like another one of those Metallica records that made them a household name. And once again, kind of like what I'm saying with like Load and the Black album, where there's a signature song that is like the only song known from that album being Master of Puppets. But there are other good tracks on this album. And Master of Puppets, to me, I think the only reason that I'm stopped from putting it at an S, comparatively speaking, is I am a Ride the Lightning fanboy, and because of that, I feel like the atmosphere and the riff writing on Ride the Lightning was a lot more expansive, a lot more experimental, whereas Master of Puppets felt like Metallica just refining their thrash metal style. Master of Puppets is the album that you put at an S if you love thrash metal, and I don't love thrash metal through and through. And obviously Ride the Lightning is a true blue thrash metal record, but what I mean by that, and I hope you guys can understand what I'm saying, Master of Puppets is much more true blue thrash metal through and through. I think atmospherically it's not as strong. It's a lot more shreddy oriented, a lot more solo oriented, a lot more riff and chuggy oriented. And so some of the more experimental and forward-thinking ideas that were on Ride the Lightning and even a track listing like The Black just weren't present on Master of Puppets. And even though it is absolutely iconic and very worthy of like the highest A that you can possibly get, I'm hard-pressed to put it at an S when you have Ride the Lightning sitting right beside it that you can pick. And with that being said, I'm also going to put Ride the Lightning at an S. It is my personal favorite. This is my favorite Metallica album. I fucking love Ride the Lightning. I think it is when they were at their most focused, most experimental with the thrash metal formula. For Whom the Bell Tolls will always be, in my opinion, my favorite Metallica song. I adore it. And the funny part about it is, even though it is like a signature song from them, I don't feel like it's been overplayed as much as something like Enter Sandman or King Nothing or Master of Puppets. I love Ride the Lightning. I think it's atmospherically dense. I think it's very dark and macabre and morbid when it needs to be, but most importantly, it feels like a very fleshed out, well-defined thrash metal band that keeps enough in the formula to keep the listener engaged, to keep the listener guessing, and a lot of detours musically that keeps me extremely invested in the production, in the lyricism, in the energy, just the sheer passion and vigor of this record. Lyrically, this is on point, and I feel like the band as a whole were just on their A game. It feels like it has the way I would like to describe it, and I've described it before, is it has the amazing energy and sheer visceral passion of Kill 'Em All with the experimental nature and the dark nature of the black, and I just love it. Like, I can listen to Ride the Lightning so much. I used to have a Ride the Lightning t-shirt, and I wore the hell out of that thing. I just love Ride the Lightning. It's my favorite Metallica record, and I don't think that is ever going to change. With that being said, Saint Anger. Now, this is actually going to piss some people off, and this might surprise some people. I'm going to put it at a B, and I'm going to put it ahead of Reload. Saint Anger gets so overly hated because of a couple of things. Number one, the people that say the mix is their worst, I don't agree with. Now, while I will say, the snare on this record fucking sucks. The bass is very unintelligible, I will give you that. The fact that they were dabbling in alternative and nu metal, I think, is actually pretty cool. And anyone that, like, listened to alternative metal and nu metal in the 2000s that think that Metallica's Saint Anger is, like, the worst of the worst, hell no. There was so much corny, cringy nu metal and alt metal that was coming out around that time. And I can kind of get past the bad drum work and the bad, like, bass work, but, you know, actually, I will put it below Reload, because I think that Reload has more about it that I enjoy. Whereas I think Saint Anger, at least they were willing to take a risk. And at least if they were going to be really over the top, overproduced, like Death Magnetic, at least it was a risk. At least it was stepping into a realm that they hadn't really stepped into. And I can appreciate the risks, even though most of this track listing is very sharp and, like, not in the good way. It's very sharp around the edges and has a lot of kinks to be worked out, but I just don't hate Saint Anger as much as a lot of people do. It's certainly one of their weakest, but I just don't think it's, like, the worst of the worst. But let me play around with this list, and let me make sure that everything is where I want it to be. Honestly, I'm going to move Death Magnetic to a D. I'm going to put, let's see. Okay, I'm going to put Saint Anger at the start of C. I'm going to put Kill 'Em All below Injustice for All. And Load and Reload, I'm fine with that. Yeah, this is honestly how I would rank the discography. And I know that a lot of y'all probably are going to disagree with it, but that's the point of these lists. It's just for fun. It's just to play around with it and see, compare notes and, like, what we get. What would your ranking be and why? These are just mine. Be sure to let me know down in the comment section below, but thank you guys for voting on the poll. I'll probably have another poll up soon where I will ask you guys about another album ranking, or I'll just go down the list of the poll that I did for this one. So be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.